you have lived in many countries yourself, and I recently saw that you wrote and said you grew up in 7 different countries. Tell us a little bit more about that and how this was also linked to your life.
Good question. Yeah, so my parents met working for the same airline back in the early 80s, and my mother's from East Africa. She's from Somalia, or Somaliland, the north of Somalia. My dad is British, English, Scottish, and they met working in Dubai for the same airline. It's a lovely story. I'm not going to go into the details, but they met in Dubai in the 80s. And then because they both worked in aviation, when I was born in 89, my brother in 91, it was a time where although they'd been in the UK for a bit before I was born, it was a period of 6 years, basically, of my dad getting quite a lot of different work contracts around Asia, Southeast Asia. So I grew up in 5 countries. By the time I was 6, 5 countries in Southeast Asia, Philippines, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Australia, and Singapore. And I only really remember Singapore properly. It was my first memories. And then moved to England aged 6. And then my dad got a contract when I was 9, 10 years old, got a contract in Malawi in Southern Africa. So we moved out there for a year. For any British viewers, for year 5, I was in Malawi, and I think they called it standard. I don't know if they had that in Zimbabwe. Standard
They did.
6.
They had standards, but that was during my mum and Day's time. And then, of course, Zimbabwe, being a former British colony, we used a similar system in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Malawi, right next door to Zimbabwe. Well, not on the border, but very close. Something that's just come to mind speaking to someone who's from Zimbabwe. I've got Zimbabwean friends now, but it wasn't until 15 years after living in Malawi, so maybe a few years ago, about 10 years ago, where I started to discover or rediscover my love for African music, specifically music from sub-Saharan Africa, maybe from a few decades ago. And one of my favorite music, Sungura music from Zimbabwe, I remember vividly hearing it all over the streets of Malawi growing up. And I've just fallen back in love with it in the last few years. And I mentioned I was a DJ. I've been collecting vinyl records since I was 13 years old. And most of the last decade, it's been a lot of music from all over Africa, and including Zimbabwe. And so that period of growing up in my life, I guess 7 countries by the time I was 9 years old, has huge benefits. I've developed the ability to connect with people from any background and any culture, and it's made me adaptable. It's given me a wide knowledge of different cultures and things around the world. It's also, I'm discovering, it has come with some consequences, which possibly, is possibly affecting my life. You mentioned belonging. I guess a line that sticks in my mind is like growing up, home was everywhere, but nowhere to me. Yeah, growing up in 7 countries, heritage from 3 countries. And not just that, living in England in an area where people really have everything they would ever want. In the suburbs of London as a kid, in Surrey, and then like being airdropped into Malawi at the time, the lowest income country in the world at the time. That was an experience. And then back into Surrey in the UK. I can't really explain what that's like for a 10-year-old. It's just bonkers.
It's wild.
It's absolutely bonkers. And that has completely shaped my life. That year in Malawi, year or so we lived in Malawi, that is the reason I want to help people today. And that is clear as day for me, because I saw from a young age what it was like to not have everything that I'd grown up having, and I learned then not to take things for granted, and that I just wanted to help people in some way. Yeah.
It's very powerful because, I grew up in Zimbabwe, and people mistake me for being like a wealthy Zimbabwean, but I came from a very low socioeconomic background. It was literally low middle class and then the shanty towns. But because mom and dad made sure that us, the children, got an education, I've been able to create opportunity. And I came to Australia by myself when I was 16 years old, one bag, one backpack, and $300, and the values my mom and my dad gave me. So, of course, for me being in Australia, I'm like, I'm going to seize every opportunity because I know what it's like back in Zimbabwe. I know what millions of people are dealing with on a daily basis. And the exposure, like you said, travel has been one of my greatest teachers in life. Travel for me has created the depth of empathy that I never would have had I remained in one culture. And there's a saying, of course, to live and to only know one culture is to know no culture at all. So tell me what this experience in Malawi was like that has had you say, do you know what? I'm going to use my life, helping people. I'm going to be a coach. I'm going to be helping people and training them in mindfulness. And that's what you've dedicated yourself to be.
Well, it's not that simple. I wish it was that simple. This experience in Malawi I was 9, 10 years old. I remember arriving there as a 9-year-old. Maybe the first time I'd been to Africa. Maybe the second time, because my dad's got like close family friends in South Africa. And obviously because my parents worked for airlines, we got cheap tickets everywhere. So my parents were never rich. Like they made their careers for themselves from when they were young teenagers. Neither of my parents went to university. My dad's worked a 55+ year career in aviation from working on a ticket desk by Baker Street in London somewhere. And my mum worked from when she was 15, 16 to help her mum out because her father had passed away. Some brothers had passed away. She paid for 2 of her brothers to go to university. And then we got free tickets, cheap tickets everywhere. So we just grew up traveling a lot. And ended up in Malawi with my dad on a contract. And it was, like I say, first or second country in Africa. First time properly experiencing it, I think. And we moved there. I can't really remember starting at school, but I can vividly remember the first trip to the supermarket because there were a lot of kids outside the supermarket. There were a lot of people out there. I remember people with missing limbs and a lot of poverty, destitute poverty. This is Malawi in 1998. At the time, GDP per capita, the average, like middle income for the country, for the average person in the country was $250 a year at the time. So that gives you some idea of, us coming in from the UK, going to the supermarket. It was noticeable. Any family from,
You're so diplomatic.
especially a white man, my dad, with a black woman, my mum, and 2 mixed race but slightly Asian looking kids didn't go unnoticed. And so we did our supermarket shop this first time, I remember. And I remember coming out and saying, Dad, can we, we were being asked for money, we were being asked for food, and saying, Dad, please, can we give these kids some food? Can we give them some food? Can we give them some food? And my dad kind of like pulled me away and said, we've got to go. And I think he spoke to me in the car or somewhere. And he said, I want to help them too. I really do. I want to help them too. And he said, there's ways to do that. He said, the job I just got, we are helping these people. And they were involved in a charity initiative, working with children on the streets and all sorts through his work. But he said, but we can't come out the supermarket and do this because there will be twice as many people the next day. And he kind of explained it would cause chaos if we just went and did our weekly shop and then handed everything out outside. And we had to learn to help in other ways, simply because it would have potentially caused some issues, would have caused some issues maybe among people there. And there were times we did, but we're talking like there was, quite a lot of people. There was quite a lot of people. And it was a hard lesson to learn. I was in tears. I was in complete tears. And, he was like, we are going to be here every day. We're going to be walking here every day, and we can't help everyone every day. This is not the best way. The best way is to do it through, this organization is set up to give people proper support. And that was like so difficult. That was so difficult. And I remember becoming so immersed in Malawian culture that I'd like made friends with the kids in the local neighborhood. And then I would walk barefoot into town, like to the shops with the local kids. I'd walk barefoot. Like, of course I could afford shoes, but I'd come back with filthy feet. And I was like, 9 years old, 10 years old. And my parents would let me walk up, as a kid. That's what I remember anyway. I don't know if my parents were with me at times. Like, I would walk up the hill and walk up to the shop into town just with the Malawian kids. So school started at 7 a.m, finished at midday. The afternoon was playing sports or swimming or making catapults out of tree branches. And it was the life as a kid.